The girl's name was Lyra, and she was born on a world of shadows. Her people once lived free under skies filled with silver clouds and warm light. But those memories were far away now, buried under the weight of chains and dust. For years, she had known only the mines. The mines were endless tunnels carved into the belly of the planet. Darkness was everywhere, broken only by the flicker of weak lamps. The air was thick with ash, heavy with the taste of metal and smoke. Every breath felt like swallowing fire. Every step felt like walking into death. Lyra was young, but her eyes looked old. She had seen too much pain, too much loss. The overseers shouted and struck with their whips, their voices echoing through the stone like thunder. To them, she and the others were nothing but tools, living machines to dig rare crystals. No names, no rights, no future. Only endless labor. When Lyra was a child, she once believed she would be rescued. She thought maybe her people's warriors would return, or some miracle would come from the stars. But years passed, and hope grew smaller, until it became almost nothing. The only thing left was survival. One painful day after another, she carried heavy rocks with her small hands. Her skin was cut, scarred, and burned from long hours in the mines. Her back hurt, her legs trembled, but she kept working. If she stopped, the overseers would strike her, and she had learned not to cry. Crying only made the pain worse. Around her, other slaves worked in silence. Old ones moved slow and weak, young ones coughed blood. Sometimes, when the tunnels collapsed, screams filled the air, but no one came to save them. Bodies were left behind, buried in the dust. Life had no value here, not to the masters. Still deep inside, Lyra carried a tiny spark. It was not hope, not yet, but something else. Anger. She hated the chains. She hated the overseers. She hated the sky she could no longer see. That anger kept her moving, step after step, swing after swing of her pickaxe. It whispered that life was not meant to be like this. At night, when the overseers dragged the slaves back to their cages, Lyra curled in the corner of the cold ground. She stared at the iron bars, listening to the coughing, the crying, the whispers of others. Some prayed, some cursed, some simply slept to forget. But Lyra stayed awake, her eyes open in the darkness. She dreamed of the stars, though she had never seen them with her own eyes. She had heard stories once, before the mines, stories of great ships, of travelers from other worlds, of humans who had fought wars against monsters. Those tales felt like lies now, too far away to be real. But sometimes, when she was most tired, she repeated them in her mind. It was the only way to stop herself from breaking. The overseers thought the slaves were weak, but they did not see the truth. Even in chains, the mind can resist, the heart can resist, and in the shadows, resistance can grow. But Lyra did not know that her story was already changing. Because, far beyond the mine, a ship had entered the system. It was not like the warlords' ships, not dark, not cruel. This one carried a man with human eyes, a man who would soon step onto her world, a man who did not come for minerals or power or blood. He came because he had seen injustice, and he refused to turn away. But Lyra could not know this yet. In her cage, she pressed her forehead against the cold metal. She whispered to herself, words no one could hear, "Please, let it end." Her voice was soft, broken, but inside her chest the spark burned brighter. The tunnels of the mine stretched deeper like the veins of a wounded planet. Every hammer strike was a cry, every footstep an echo of suffering. And yet, in the silence between the sounds, something else waited. Something that felt different. Like a storm building beyond the horizon. A storm that would break her chains forever. For now, the darkness held her. For now, the overseers controlled her life. But the universe was vast, and fate was moving closer. One human would change her, destiny, and the girl who once lived only in chains would one day see the stars. Lyra's life was not measured in days or months. It was measured in the number of lashes on her back, the number of rocks she carried, the number of nights she survived. Time inside the mines did not flow like it did on the surface. There was no sunrise, no sunset, Only endless shadows and the sound of chains clashing against stone. She had been taken when she was just a child, no more than 7 or 8 years old. She remembered that day like a scar that never healed. The invaders came with fire and thunder, their ships raining metal upon her village. The sky burned red. Homes collapsed and her people screamed as they were dragged away. She had cried for her mother, but the soldiers pulled her from her arms, and that was the last time she ever saw her family. From that moment, Lyra's childhood ended. Her new world was a prison of stone and darkness. At first, she cried every night, her small voice calling for her parents. But the overseers hated weakness, and every tear was answered with pain. She learned quickly that silence was safer than hope. The mines took more than her freedom. They took her innocence. She was forced to carry tools too heavy for her small arms, to dig minerals sharper. The knives, every strike cut her hands, every load bent her back. When she fell, she was kicked until she stood again. When she slowed, she was whipped until her skin broke. Pain became normal, like breathing, like hunger. Lyra saw others suffer too. The old ones who could no longer lift rocks were beaten until they collapsed. The young ones coughed blood and sometimes never woke up. When a tunnel collapsed, the overseers did not rescue the trapped slaves. They simply ordered others to dig around the rubble, leaving the lost ones buried forever. The message was clear. Life meant nothing here. Years passed, but she never knew how many. The days blurred together. Work, pain, sleep, repeat. Her body grew taller, stronger, but her heart felt heavier. Every scar told a story of suffering. Every wrinkle of her clothes was marked by dirt and ash. Sometimes, she forgot what it meant to smile. Sometimes she even forgot her own reflection. There were no mirrors in the mines, and she began to wonder if she still looked like the child who once ran under the open sky. Still, in the deep silence of the tunnels, there were whispers. Slaves spoke in secret when the overseers were not listening. They told stories of escape, of rebellions that failed, of heroes who never returned, and sometimes, very rarely, they spoke of humans, strange beings from far stars who had fought tyrants and freed worlds. To Lyra, those stories sounded like dreams, dreams too beautiful to be true. But when she lay on the cold ground at night, she held on to them, repeating the words in her mind until sleep came. The overseers tried to break not only the body but also the spirit. They wanted slaves to forget who they were, to forget their songs, their language, their past. But Lyra remembered. In the silence of her heart, she remembered her mother's voice, her father's laugh, the sound of her people's drums. These memories were like tiny stars in her darkness, faint but alive. As the years stretched on, trauma shaped her. Her fear became armor, her anger became fire, her silence became strength. But inside, she was still a child who longed for warmth, who longed for someone to tell her she mattered. She hated herself for wanting such things, because in the mines there was no kindness, no love, only survival. One day she watched as a young boy, no older than she had once been, collapsed beside her. He was too weak to carry his load, too broken to stand. The overseer struck him again and again, but the boy did not move. Finally, the overseer dragged his lifeless body away. Lyra stared at the empty space where he had been, and something inside her broke a little more. She realized then that the mines would not only kill her body, but also erase her soul if she let them. And so, she made a silent promise to herself. She would survive, not because she hoped for rescue, but because she refused to give her captors victory. Every breath she took was defiance. Every step she made was rebellion. Even if she died here, she would die as herself, not as their machine. Yet, in the deepest part of her heart, there was still a question she could not silence. Will I ever see the stars? The thought haunted her every night, echoing in the cold silence of her cage. She dreamed of skies she never knew, of worlds she had only heard about. But dreams always ended when the overseers woke the slaves, dragging them back into the tunnels, and so the years of trauma continued. Each scar, each memory built the story of a girl who had been broken but not destroyed, a girl who had forgotten the sound of laughter but remembered the fire of anger, a girl who still carried a spark in the dark. a spark that waited for something, or someone, to ignite it. Far away, beyond the tunnels, beyond the chains, a human ship had entered orbit. And though Lyra did not know it yet, her years of trauma were only the beginning. Because soon, her life would collide with his, and everything she had endured would shape the warrior she was about to become. The day began like every other in the mines. Chains rattled, overseers shouted, and the slaves moved in silence. Lyra carried her pickaxe, her hands trembling from exhaustion, her back burned with scars, her eyes dim with pain. It felt like the same nightmare repeating again and again. But that day something was different. Whispers spread through the tunnels, carried from mouth to mouth. "A new ship has landed," someone muttered. "It is not the warlord's vessel," another whispered. Hope and fear twisted together in every voice, because new ships rarely meant mercy. The overseers were restless. They shouted louder, struck harder, as if they too were afraid. Lyra felt the tension in the air, heavy like the weight of the stone above her head. She tried to ignore it, to focus on her work. But her heart beat faster with every rumor. Ships meant change, and change in the mines was always dangerous. Later, when the slaves were forced to gather at the surface for inspection, Lyra saw him for the first time. The human stood apart from the overseers, his figure strong, his uniform strange. He did not wear the cruel armor of the warlords, nor the metal masks of the guards. His face was uncovered, his eyes sharp but filled with something unfamiliar, anger mixed with pity. He looked at the slaves not as tools, not as broken bodies, but as living beings. Lyra froze, her breath caught in her chest. She had heard of humans and the whispers of other slaves, stories told in the dark to comfort themselves. Some said humans were warriors who fought monsters. Others claimed they were conquerors like the warlords. No one truly knew the truth. But when Lyra looked into this man's eyes, she felt something she had not felt in years: recognition. As if, for the first time, someone truly saw her, the overseers barked orders, forcing the slaves to kneel. The human did not kneel. He stood tall, his hands clenched at his sides. One overseer struck a weak old slave with his whip, forcing him into the dirt. Lyra saw the human's jaw tighten, his eyes narrow. In that moment she understood. He hated what he saw. The human's name was Ray, though Lyra did not know it yet. He spoke in a language she barely understood, but the tone carried more than words. It was sharp, demanding, filled with challenge. The overseers growled back, trying to show their power, but even Lyra could tell the human was not afraid. That night, when the slaves were dragged back to their cages, the whispers returned. "Did you see his eyes?" someone asked. "He looked like he wanted to fight them," another said. Lyra stayed silent, but inside her heart, a storm was building. She could not forget his face, his voice, his anger. For the first time in years, she dreamed of something new, not of freedom, not of escape, but of a possibility she had never dared to imagine. That someone might care, that someone might try. Days passed, and the human appeared again. He did not act like the overseers. He walked among the slaves, with quiet steps. Sometimes he slipped food into weak hands when the guards were not watching. Sometimes he dropped small packs of medicine, pretending not to notice when the sick grabbed them. Each act was a risk, each act was rebellion, and each act burned brighter in Lyra's heart. One night, when the tunnels were silent and most slaves slept, Lyra could not close her eyes. She sat awake in her cage, staring at the cold iron bars. Then she heard it. Footsteps, slow and careful, moving closer. She held her breath, afraid it was an overseer, afraid it was punishment. But then she saw him, the human, standing just beyond the shadows. His face was calm but serious, his eyes scanning the room. For a moment their gazes locked. Lyra felt fear and wonder twist together inside her chest. Why was he here? Why was he looking at her? She wanted to look away, but she could not. And then something impossible happened. He smiled, just a small smile, quick and fleeting. But in that single moment, The darkness around her seemed to break. She did not speak. She did not move. But in her heart, something shifted. For years she had been surrounded by cruelty, beaten into silence, chained into hopelessness. Now for the first time someone had looked at her not with hate, not with pity, but with a promise. She did not yet understand what it meant, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. The mines were still filled with shadows. The overseers still ruled with chains and whips. But Lyra had seen something brighter than the lamps, brighter than the fire. She had seen the human, and deep inside, she felt the spark of a new story, beginning. The mines were silent that night, but silence in the mines was never safe. It meant the overseers were sleeping or hunting or waiting. The slaves lay in their cages, most of them too tired to whisper, too broken to dream. But Lyra was awake. Her eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the bars, her heart still remembered the human, the way he had looked at her, the way his eyes burned with something more than cruelty. She had told herself it was nothing, a trick of her mind, a false hope. But that night, when the darkness was deep and the overseer's boots were far away, she heard the sound again. Quiet footsteps, careful, steady. Her pulse quickened. Fear and curiosity tangled together inside her chest. From the shadows he appeared, the human Ray. He moved slowly, watching the corners, his hands close to his belt where strange tools hung. When his eyes found Lyra, he did not speak at first. He simply crouched low, his face lit by the faint glow of a small light on his wrist. Lyra pressed back against the bars, her breath sharp and uneven. Her voice trembled when she whispered, "Why are you here?" Ray glanced at the sleeping slaves, then leaned closer. His words were low, heavy with meaning. "To help." She shook her head, her chains clinking softly. No one helped in the mines. No one cared. The last time she trusted someone, it cost her everything. Her throat tightened as she hissed back, "This is a trap, you want me to believe? Me too." But Ray's gaze did not shift. His voice remained steady. "I don't want you to believe, I want you to survive." Something in his tone pierced her doubt. He was not like the overseers, who barked commands like weapons. He was not like the other slaves, who whispered only of despair. His voice carried a strange strength, a promise that felt alive. Ray slid a small package through the bars wrapped in cloth. Inside were dried rations, and a vial of glowing liquid she recognized as medicine. Lyra stared at it, her hands trembling as she picked it up. Food was rare, medicine rarer still. If the overseers caught her with it, she would be punished, maybe even killed. Her whisper cracked like a broken branch. "Why risk your life for me?" Ray's answer was simple, almost too simple. "Because you deserve more than chains." The words struck her harder than any whip ever had. For years, she had been told she was nothing. Only a tool, a shadow, a number. But in his eyes, she saw something else. Value. He looked at her as if she was a person, not a slave. Fear clawed at her chest, but so did something new. Something dangerous. Something she had buried long ago. Hope. It frightened her more than the overseers ever had. Hope was a fragile flame, and flames did not survive in the mines. Ray leaned closer, his voice barely a breath. "I cannot save everyone, not yet, but I can save you." Lyra's throat tightened, her mind screaming that this was impossible. But her heart whispered something different. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. He studied her face as if measuring her courage, then said the words that would change her forever. "I will take you away from here." Her body froze. Her chains felt heavier. Her mind raced. Escape was death. The overseers made sure everyone knew it. But when Ray spoke, it did not sound like a dream. It sounded like a plan. Still, fear dragged at her voice. "They will kill us." Ray's eyes narrowed, his jaw set. "Then let them try." For the first time in years, Lyra felt a spark of fire inside her chest that was not anger, but something sharper, something brighter. She wanted to trust him, but the years of trauma wrapped around her like chains. What if this was all a lie? What if he left her behind like everyone else had? But then she remembered his eyes on the surface, the fury when he saw the whip, the secret kindness of food in the shadows. This man was different. She could feel it. The silence between them stretched, filled with tension like the air before a storm. Then Lyra whispered the words that sealed her path. "Show me how." Ray's lips curved into the faintest smile, not of joy but of determination. He leaned even closer, explaining in hushed tones, "There are weak points in the tunnels, places the overseers don't watch. You know them better than anyone. If we join what I know with what you know, we can escape." Lyra's heart pounded as she listened, every detail etched into her memory. For the first time, her knowledge of the mines was not just survival, it was a weapon. She nodded slowly, a fire burning inside her she had thought was long dead. The overseers had taught her silence, pain, and despair. But now, with this human's voice in the darkness, she remembered something greater. She remembered what it felt like to fight. When Ray pulled back into the shadows, his final words lingered. "Be ready. When the moment comes, we run." As he vanished into the night, Lyra sat in the cage with the small package in her hands. Her chain still bound her. The overseers still ruled. The mines were still full of suffering. But her heart was different now. For years she had been nothing but a slave, a number lost in the dark. Now for the first time she felt like a person again, and in the silence of that night, she whispered to herself, "Maybe the stars are closer than I thought." Days in the mine dragged on as if time itself was chained. But inside Lyra, something had changed. The promise of the human. Ray echoed in her mind. "I will take you away from here," he had said, and those words burned brighter than the lamps in the tunnels. She tried to work as if nothing was different. She carried rocks, swung her pickaxe, obeyed orders. But in her eyes, a secret fire glowed. Every step, every glance, she searched for the weak points in the mine. She knew the tunnels better than anyone. She had grown up in them, suffered in them, bled in them. Now that knowledge became her weapon. At night, when the cages grew silent and the overseers slept, Ray returned, always in the shadows, always careful. They whispered through the bars, exchanging fragments of plans like stolen breaths. Ray asked about hidden paths, about guard routines, about escape routes. And Lyra answered, her voice low but steady. She described narrow shafts where overseers never entered, old cracks in the stone walls, tunnels that connected deep chambers, places where the slaves whispered of ghosts, but she knew they were real. Ray brought tools, small and strange, a device that could cut through iron, another that could scramble signals. To Lyra, they looked like pieces of magic, but Ray explained them simply. "These will buy us time, but we must be faster than their anger," he said. Lyra nodded, her chains rattling softly as her fingers gripped the bars. She began to notice more, details she once ignored. Which overseer fell asleep during late watch? Which guard drank too much? Which patrol always passed the same tunnel at the same time? Every detail was a piece of the puzzle. Every risk was a doorway to freedom, but fear was always there too. The overseers punished even the smallest mistake. One night, a slave dropped a tool and an overseer beat him until he stopped moving. The cage filled with silence after that. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Lyra's heart pounded, her body trembling. She whispered to herself again and again, "Don't get caught. Don't let him down." Ray noticed her fear, and one night he said softly, "You are stronger than you know." Lyra wanted to deny it, but when she met his eyes, she saw truth. Strength was not only in the body, it was in the will, and her will had survived years of chains. That was strength the overseers could never take. The plan grew slowly, like a seed pushing through stone. It was not perfect, it was full of danger, but it was alive. They would strike during the night shift. When half the overseers slept, Ray would cut the cage. Lyra would lead him through the hidden shafts. If they were fast, if luck stayed with them, they would reach the surface before alarms spread. If not, they would die in the tunnels. Still, Lyra found herself clinging to the thought of stars. She had never seen them, only heard stories. But the idea of breathing free air, of looking up into endless skies, filled her chest with a strange ache. It was no longer just survival. It was a dream. A dangerous dream, but one worth risking everything for. One evening, as they whispered the final details, Ray's voice grew serious. "When the time comes, you must not hesitate," he warned. Lyra frowned, her voice sharp. "What about the others?" Ray's jaw tightened, his eyes heavy with sorrow. "If we try to save everyone now, we will save no one. This is only the beginning. We need to survive first, then fight." The words cut deep, because she wanted to free them all, but she knew he was right. Freedom started with survival. The night before their escape, Lyra could not sleep. She sat in her cage, staring at the iron bars, running her fingers over the package of food and medicine Ray had given her. Her heart raced, her stomach twisted. What if the plan failed? What if Ray was caught? What if the overseers made an example of her? But then she remembered his voice, calm and steady. "Because you deserve more than chains." She held on to that sentence like a shield. When Ray came to her cage that night, his expression was grim but determined. He whispered, "It is time." Her breath caught, her hands trembled, but she nodded. Ray pulled out his strange device, pressing it against the iron bars. There was a faint hiss, a glow, and then silence as the bars melted away like wax. Lyra's eyes widened, her heart leaping. She stepped out of the cage for the first time in years. The air felt different, even though it was the same heavy mine air. Her feet moved lightly, her chains rattling softly as she followed Ray into the shadows. Every sound felt too loud, every step too dangerous. But the taste of freedom was already on her tongue. They slipped into the narrow shafts, crawling through cracks no overseer had ever dared to enter. The tunnels were damp, sharp, filled with dust. But to Lyra, they felt like paths carved by fate. She led the way, whispering directions while Ray covered their tracks. Together, they moved like ghosts through the belly of the mine. And all the while, a storm built in her chest. Fear and hope clashed inside her. Each heartbeat a drum of war. For the first time in her life, Lyra was not just surviving, she was fighting for something greater. And though the overseers still ruled the mines, though the chains still clung to her wrists, in that moment, she was more dangerous than she had ever been, because she was no longer waiting for freedom. She was reaching for it. The tunnels trembled with silence, a silence so sharp it cut through Lyra's chest. Her hands shook as she followed Ray through the narrow shaft, their shadows flickering against the jagged stone. Every scrape of their boots, every rattle of her chains felt like thunder waiting to betray them. But Ray moved with steady calm, his eyes sharp, his every step planned. He was not just escaping, he was guiding. Behind them, the cages of slaves lay in darkness, untouched. It tore at Lyra's heart to leave them, but Ray's words rang in her ears. "If we save ourselves now, we can fight for them later." She swallowed her guilt like poison, forcing her body forward. The shaft widened into an old chamber, abandoned long ago. Dust fell from the ceiling as if the earth itself held its breath. Ray knelt, pulling a small device from his belt, pressing buttons with practiced hands. Lyra crouched beside him, her voice barely a whisper. "What is it?" He answered quickly. "Diversion." A faint hum filled the air, followed by a flicker of blue light. Ray placed the device against the stone wall, and it began to glow like a living ember. He turned to her, his eyes sharp. "Once it goes off, they will think we are deeper inside. It will give us time." Her throat tightened, fear clawing at her chest, but she nodded. Moments later, a deep vibration shook the ground. The mines howled with the sound of collapse, dust pouring from the ceiling like rain. Alarms screamed, red lights flickered, overseers shouted orders in panic. The air filled with chaos, and in that chaos, Ray grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her forward. This is our chance. Run. They sprinted through the tunnels, weaving through cracks and hidden passages. Lyra's breath came sharp and fast, her lungs burning, but her legs refused to stop. For the first time, she was not moving under orders, not under fear of a whip. She was running for her own life, for her own freedom. But the overseers were not blind. Their voices echoed through the stone, growing closer. Boots pounded, chains rattled, weapons clashed. The mine was no longer silent. It was alive with the hunt. Ray raised a small weapon, its glow alien to Lyra's eyes. When the first overseer appeared, armored and snarling, Ray fired. The blast lit the tunnel like lightning, striking the guard down in a burst of sparks. Lyra gasped, her heart racing. She had never seen power like this. Ray turned to her, his voice urgent. "Keep moving, don't look back." They pushed deeper into the mine's secret arteries. Every step closer to the surface was a step closer to death. Overseers blocked paths, weapons flashing, voices roaring. But Ray fought with fire, his weapon blazing, his fists striking with fury. For every overseer that fell, 2 more came. The air shook with battle, dust swirling like a storm. Lyra grabbed rocks, striking when she could. Her arms ached, her body weak, but her anger gave her strength. She was no longer just a slave hiding in the shadows. She was a fighter standing beside the human who refused to bow. A blast tore through the tunnel wall, sending shards of stone flying. Lyra stumbled, her knees scraping against the ground. Ray pulled her up with one hand, shielding her with the other. "Stay with me," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. And she did with every ounce of her will. The final tunnel loomed ahead, its ceiling cracked, light spilling through the fractures. For the first time in years, Lyra saw a hint of the sky, pale and distant above the stone. Her heart surged, her body trembling. The stars were close, closer than ever, but the overseers would not let them go easily. The final gate was lined with guards, their weapons drawn, their eyes burning with rage. Ray gritted his teeth, setting his weapon to full power. "This is it," he growled. "We break through, or we die here." The tunnel exploded with sound, fire and smoke filling the air. Ray charged forward, his weapon roaring. Lyra followed, her voice silent but her spirit screaming with defiance. Guards fell, chains shattered, the ground shook with every step. It was not just escape, it was war. At last, the final blast tore the gate apart. Stone and iron crashed to the ground, light pouring in like a flood. Lyra stumbled into the open air, her eyes wide, her chest heaving. The sky stretched above her, vast and endless. For the first time in her life, she saw stars, not as whispers or dreams, but real and alive. Tears blurred her vision as she collapsed to her knees. The cold night air filled her lungs, sharp but pure. She laughed, a broken, breathless sound she had not made in years. Ray stood beside her, his weapon still raised, his eyes scanning the horizon. But for a moment, even he looked at her with a softness that broke the darkness inside her. Behind them, the mine burned, flames licking the sky, overseers screaming in chaos. Ahead of them, the human's ship waited, its lights glowing like a beacon. Ray placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low but steady. "You're free now." Lyra looked at him, her tears turning into a trembling smile. And for the first time since her childhood, she whispered words she had almost forgotten. "Thank you." The night air wrapped around Lyra like a strange new cloak, cold, sharp, alive. It stung her lungs with every breath, but she welcomed the sting. It was proof that she was no longer inside the mines, no longer choking on dust and smoke. For the first time in years, she could see the open sky, vast and endless above her. The stars stretched across the heavens like silver fires. She stared at them with wide eyes, her heart trembling. All her life she had only imagined them, whispers of light hidden in the stories of other slaves. Now they were real, glowing above her, and she felt smaller than she had ever felt before. Ray stood beside her, his figure tall and steady against the burning glow of the mine, his weapon still in his hand, his eyes scanning for danger. But when he looked at her, the sharpness softened. "You're safe now," he said, his voice calm, steady, and certain. Lyra's throat tightened, words caught between fear and gratitude. She whispered back, "Safe." As if testing the word, as if it was too fragile. To hold behind them, the mines burned, overseers screamed. Chaos echoed across the stone valleys. But ahead of them, the human's ship waited, its lights glowing like a promise. Ray placed a hand on her shoulder, gently guiding her forward. "Come, we don't have much time," he said. Lyra nodded, her legs heavy, her chains rattling softly. Every step toward the ship felt unreal, as if she walked in a dream. The ramp hissed open, light spilling from inside. Lyra froze at the edge, her body shaking. The mine had been her prison, but it was also all she had ever known. Freedom was terrifying, wide and unknown. Ray saw her hesitation and knelt beside her. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You are not a slave anymore. You are alive and you are free." The words broke something inside her. Tears spilled from her eyes, hot and relentless. She stepped onto the ramp, her chains clinking with every movement. The ship's floor felt strange beneath her feet, smooth and warm. The air smelled different, cleaner, sharper, like the promise of something new. Inside, the walls glowed with soft lights, humming with quiet power. Lyra's eyes darted everywhere, her fear mixing with awe. She touched the walls as if they might vanish. "This is real," she whispered, her voice shaking. Ray answered firmly, "Yes, this is real and it's yours now too." He led her to a seat, unclipping her chains with careful hands. The iron fell to the floor with a heavy clang. Lyra stared at her wrists, raw and scarred, but free. Her breath caught, her chest heaved. She whispered again and again, "I'm free, I'm free." Ray gave her a small smile, tired but genuine. "Yes, you are." The ship rumbled as it lifted from the ground. Through the window, Lyra saw the burning mines shrink into the distance. The prison of her life became smaller and smaller until it was nothing more than a scar on the planet's skin. She pressed, her forehead against the glass, staring at the stars. Her tears flowed silently, but for the first time they were not only tears of pain, they were tears of release. Ray sat across from her, his eyes watching quietly. He did not speak much, but his silence was steady, solid, safe. Lyra felt her heart ease in his presence. For years she had been surrounded by cruelty and lies. Now, even in the silence, she felt truth. Hours passed, but Lyra did not sleep. She traced her scars, touched the smooth walls, stared at the stars. Her body was free, but her mind was still heavy with years of trauma. Every scream, every lash, every loss echoed inside her. She wondered if she would ever heal, if freedom could erase chains that lived inside the soul. Ray seemed to sense her thoughts. He spoke, softly. "It will take time, but you are not alone now." Lyra's eyes lifted to him, her voice trembling. "Why me?" Ray's gaze was steady. "Because you are worth saving. Every life is worth saving, and yours is no less than mine." Her chest tightened, her heart aching with a pain she did not understand. No one had ever told her she was worth anything. The overseers had told her she was nothing. The mines had told her she was nothing. But here, in the quiet hum of the ship, she heard a new truth, and she wanted to believe it. She leaned back, closing her eyes, letting the stars burn behind her lids. For the first time, she felt the weight of chains lifting, not only from her body, but from her spirit. She whispered softly, almost too soft to hear. "Maybe hope is real." Ray heard her, and his lips curved into the faintest smile. "Yes," he said, his voice steady and sure. "Hope is real." The ship cut through the black of space, carrying them farther from the mines. The fire of her past still burned behind them, but ahead stretched the endless stars. Lyra pressed her hands together, her scars still aching, but her spirit lighter. The journey was only beginning. Her healing was only beginning, but she was no longer a mine slave. No longer a broken child of the shadows, she was free. And with the human beside her, she would discover who she truly was. And so, the story of the alien girl who once lived in chains ended in the silence of the stars. Not with despair, not with loss, but with the first fragile spark of a new life.